First of all, thank you so much for the incredible opportunity to be here with you guys. I've been in and out through the course of this conference, and I don't really think I ever understood how much there was to do within the financial industries. I've learned a lot of things, like the phrase, I wrote it down because I wasn't going to remember it, legislative contraventions. I don't know what it means, but it sounded really fancy. And this conference has been about how we shape the future of the financial industries, but my job here today is to hopefully inspire you, encourage you, and challenge you around shaping the future of the next generation. In the beginning of 2017, myself and my co-founder Genevieve Moore, we launched the organisation Voices of Hope. We both had our own struggles with past mental illness, and so we decided that we wanted to use our past as a way to help those who are struggling. So we launched at the start of 2017, and the very first video that we launched was a video called Dear Suicidal Me. It was a video that we were hoping was going to be able to reach New Zealand, and what happened next we could have never expected. Within the first 24 hours we saw 1 million views on the video, and then it was 5 million, and then 10 million, and then 20 million, and now we're sitting at 80 million views. It was shared across the world, and we've had thousands of messages since of people saying that they've seen hope in a way that they've never seen it before. The video has 4 people reading out their suicide notes from when they tried to take their life. I then got everyone to write a letter called Dear Suicidal Me, and it was a letter basically like, Dear Suicidal Me, I know that right now it feels like you can't do it, but what you don't realize is you're about to become a father, you're about to live free, you're about to become an award-winning actor. And that video, the concept of that video was actually inspired by a letter that I wrote myself, a letter that I wrote after my last suicide attempt as I was sitting in the Auckland psych unit. You see, let me explain. As a toddler, I was a kind of normal toddler. I loved Barney and all of those fun things. And when you're like 3 years old, it's kind of the age where you just ask lots of questions. It's just why, like how. But you see, the kind of questions that I was asking as a 3-year-old, they were very different. The kinds of questions I was asking were questions that no 3-year-old should be asking. They were questions like, why is he hurting me? And why can't I tell anyone? You see, as a 3-year-old, it was the very first time that I learnt pain. It was the first time that I felt shame. It was the very first time that someone in my household sexually abused me. Now, I didn't understand as a 3-year-old what was going on, but the implications of that was massive. My child, youth, and family files state that I went from being bubbly and happy to dull and lacking emotions. They state that I would be seen in the corner crying after a smallest inconvenience had happened. My reactions were massive. At the age of 3, the course of my life was shifted. Fast forward a few years, I was in school, and I was severely bullied through school. And I remember one specific incident, and I was about 7 years old, and I was going out of the playground with a whole bunch of people in break, and I went across the monkey bars, and I turned around and I just saw all these kids laughing. Now, as a 7-year-old, I didn't really understand what was going on until one of them piped up and said, no one wants to touch those because no one wants to catch your disease. Now, here now as a 23-year-old, that may not mean a lot, but to a 7-year-old, that was everything. To a 7-year-old, that confirmed the belief I am unlovable. It confirmed the belief I am useless. It confirmed I am ugly, and it shaped my inside world. It shaped my beliefs. So when I got to 12 years old, with everything that was going on, I got to the point where I tried to walk out of my own life. It was a decision that no 12-year-old should make, but unfortunately it's a decision that young people in our nation are making. If I go forward a few years, I survived that attempt very thankfully, but I went back to school, and school was still going real hard, and at the age of 16, I made the decision that if I was going to do anything with my life, then I needed to get out of the town that I was in. I was born in a small town in the South Island called Timaru. So at the age of 16, I saved up all of my money. I was working at a fish and chip shop, which is really funny because that's when I found out I was allergic to seafood. So that was great. But I saved up all my money, and I moved up to Auckland, and I actually remember coming here, and it was the first time I'd lived by myself. I found a flat on Trade Me, and I was real surprised when I found out that things like water wasn't free and like power. Like, that's a shock to a 16-year-old. And so I moved up here, and I remember thinking, okay, now everything's going to change. Everything's going to be different. My life is going to be great. But here's the thing. I can run away from my situation, but I couldn't run away from myself. So throughout the rest of my teenage years, I tried to take my life a further 13 times. I was landed in a coma in the mental health ward. I truly believed that my life was not worth living. I'd pushed away everyone that was close to me. People were trying to say, Jazz, we love you, Jazz, we care about you, but my internal belief said, no, I have to push you away because you're going to hurt me. So I became very isolated. I remember sitting in the psych ward and I was typing out on my laptop about how alone I felt and that there was just no point anymore. But you see, then I had a conversation that changed everything. I had a conversation that I now to this day will say saved my life. I had just tried to take my life for the very last time, and I was sitting in that ward, and I had this incredible woman. She's been walking with me since I was 12 years old. I actually met her at a high school tour. They came in and were doing an anti-bullying program, and she came into my high school, and so when I moved to Auckland, I reconnected with her, and she came into the psych ward, and I remember I was just sitting there, I was just bawling my eyes out, and she went, Jazz, why are you crying? And I turned to her and I just said, I'm just so tired of fighting. And she looked at me and goes, Jazz, what do you think the definition of fighting is? Because I don't think that you're fighting. I think you're only surviving. And it's only when you learn how to fight that the change that you're longing to see is going to happen. And I remember taking that and going, man, if I've been surviving this whole time and fighting might actually change something, then I've got to learn how to do that. So within the walls of the mental health ward, I jumped on Google and I was looking up the definitions of surviving and fighting. And to survive is to continue to live or exist in hardship. Now, having a survival instinct is important. It's what keeps us going. But you accept your situation as normal. Now, the definition of fighting is to engage in a battle or war, fight to overcome and destroy an adversary. So, as I was sitting in that ward, I was like, okay, I've got to fight. How do I do that? I've got to engage. What does engage look like? What I very quickly discovered was that I wasn't fighting my suicidal tendencies, but I was fighting the beliefs that put me there. For me, those beliefs were that I'm unlovable and I'm a burden. And so what I did is that I wrote in my journal, I wrote down those beliefs on one side of a piece of paper, drew a line, and on the other side, I wrote down everything that those closest to me said or did that contradicted those beliefs. So that every time that my mind went, Jazz, you're unlovable, Jazz, you're a burden, you shouldn't be here, I would pull out this list and I would have solid evidence in front of me that what was going on the outside didn't match what was going on the inside. Another thing that I did was that I had to start really engaging in therapy. I remember I'd been going in for years, and I would just kind of sit there going, I don't want to do this. But that's because I went in with the perception that this is part of my identity. Therefore, it will never change. This is who I am. The first time I tried to take my life, I was 12. This is something I've tried to do in total 14 times. This is who I am. It can never change. But when I started to go in with the mindset of, okay, maybe this is just something that I'm dealing with, that's when things started to change. One of the other things that I did, which honestly is the thing that I think really saved my life, is that I wrote a letter called Dear Suicidal Me. And that's the letter that inspired that video. But at the time, that letter was written to my future suicidal self. I knew my pattern. I knew that eventually I was going to end up here again. So when I had a glimmer of hope, I wrote that letter. And it just said things like, Jazz, I know that right now it feels like you can never get through this, but I know that there's hope. You know what you need to do to get through this. Message these people, put on inspirational music, not sad music like you always do, it makes you feel worse. All of those kind of things, so that when I felt I can't do this anymore, not only did I have, psychologists often talk about having a safety plan, which are great, but it's a whole nother thing when it comes from yourself. It's a whole nother thing when you've written from a slight hope-filled moment, okay, this is how I fight, this is what I can do, these are the people that I need to call. And I took out that letter many, many times over the next following few months, and eventually I got to a point where those suicidal thoughts, the depression, the PTSD that I was diagnosed, gone. I no longer live with the burdens of my past, but instead I walk into the future, and it's so exciting. One of the other things that I actually had to do, which is why I love conferences like this when you guys have such purpose into it, is that For me, I'm such a dreamer. I love dreaming. I love looking at the future. But when you're in that place, it's impossible to fight if you don't know what you're fighting for. And so for me, to be able to sit down and say, okay, where do I want to be? What do I want to do with my life? When I began to dream again, when I began to dream about the future, that's when things started to ignite in me. And what was awesome was that at a time where I couldn't do that for myself, I had incredible people around me. I had people, not necessarily my family, I completely separated out from them when I was 16, but other people who chose to get around me. They sat down and they said, Jazz, I believe in your future. Jazz, this is where you can be. This is where you can go. And it's through that that I was able to then eventually get through and then launch everything that is Voices of Hope. And you know, this is everything that has happened now. I look back at my past, I look back at everything, and I would never take any of it back, because it's allowed me now to reach thousands of people across not just this nation, but now around the world. I'm now directing a new series, which is going to be coming out in March next year, about suicide from Hope's perspective, and there's also a feature film being made at the moment as well that's following our journey. And so the amount of people that we're now being able to impact is just incredible. But what I also really want to talk about is really the question of why should you care? Why should you, you're these high corporate people who are running 1,000,000 miles an hour. I honestly don't think I've ever been in a room with so many suits in my life. You guys are awesome. But here's the thing, Blair, they didn't actually ask me to do this, but I just want you to understand what the part that you really can play is that after we won the A&P scholarship last year, we were able to create so many content and campaigns. We did a men's campaign called It's Not Weak to Speak that blew up and was really cool. There was men messaging us and sharing their stories, but I actually want to read you one of the thousands of messages that we got following a video that was funded by A&P, just to give you an understanding of the extent of what's going on. And it goes like this. It's from someone in Canada who emailed us. Hi there. My name is Amy and I'm a mother from Canada. It's taken me a few weeks to gather myself and send this email as I haven't found the words to express to you. On March 1st, my 15-year-old daughter walked into my room crying, suicide note in hand, and told me that she needed help. As I held her, she told me that there was a rope hanging in her wardrobe ready for her, and sure enough, there was. Through her tears, she showed me that after she set up the rope and wrote the letter, she went on Facebook to message her best friend goodbye. As she logged into her laptop, at the very top of her newsfeed was a video that one of her friends shared. The video was one of yours. She clicked on it, watched it, and suddenly realized that she couldn't take her life and she needed to fight. So instead of going to the rope, she came to my room and told me everything about the bullying, how depressed she was. But following that video, she felt like there was hope for her. Now, my daughter is still alive and in therapy because of you. So thank you for saving her life and giving her hope. I cannot begin to express how grateful I am that you saved my daughter's life. That's the kind of thing that you can be a part of. That's the kind of thing that A&P, thank you for believing in us, because if it wasn't for you, then we don't know what could have happened to that 15-year-old or the thousands of others who have messaged us. We get kids all the time, because what you have to understand as parents is that often when our kids are feeling at the lowest, they're locked up in their rooms in the dark and they're just scrolling social media. And on social media is where they see our content. On social media is where they see our hope-filled videos, and that's really what our mission has been, is to be able to get into the places where maybe they don't feel like yet they can speak up, but we can get into a place where they're just sitting there right on their screens. And you know, the other thing is that in our recent suicide statistics, it's saying that there's double the amount of people that took their life that were employed that were unemployed. So for businesses, you have a responsibility to be checking in on your staff, especially in such high pressure industries. It's not just normal kind of, health and safety if people get hurt and things like that, which is really important. But man, you have an obligation, you have a responsibility to be able to come in for your staff, and I couldn't tell you how many men that we've had reach out to us. We had one man quite recently actually that emailed us and said, I didn't think I could do this anymore. I thought my kids would be better off without me. But I saw one of your videos and I'm still here today. I also, not too long ago, I wrote a letter called Dear the Police Officer That Saved My Life. And it was a letter that it was one of my last suicide attempts, and I remember that I was about to do it, and I went to jump, and I just felt these hands on my back, and it was the hands of a police officer called Constable Campbell. She picked me up, took me down to the police car, and I just sat there bawling my eyes out. And it was probably like 20 minutes, and I looked up at her after that time, and she was just crying. This police officer, who I assumed didn't really care, was just doing a job, was just sobbing. She came with me to the hospital, was sitting on my bed with me, refused to leave my side. And she said, Jazz, I need you to make it to your 21st birthday, and when you do, I'm going to come say happy birthday. We're going to celebrate the fact that you're still here. And sure enough, a couple of years later, on my 21st birthday, she shows up at my door. At that point, I'd forgotten about it, but she didn't. So I wrote a letter about that, and I put it up, and I had police officers and we had detectives messaging us saying that they were about to quit the force, and they were reminded of why they're doing it, that they were about to leave because it was too much, but they were reminded why they were doing it, why they got into it in the first place. And the other thing that I actually just really want to touch on as well is that belief, that core belief list that I was telling you about, where I wrote down my core beliefs, then on the other side of the piece of paper, I wrote down everything people said or did that contradicted those beliefs. What I want you to understand is that 90% of that list was written by actually a man who's standing at the back, Wayne and Libby Huidua. Now, I was really good friends with their daughter, and I started kind of hanging out at their house a lot, and they saw a young girl who was very broken. They saw a young girl who was trapped in her mind. They saw a young girl who didn't want to live, and they took it upon themselves as their responsibility to speak hope. They chose to speak into my future. They chose to show me what love is. They chose to show me that I could get through this. And I don't know if you know this or not, but in recent statistics, it says that over 270,000 families in New Zealand are living in a fatherless home. So fathers that are in here, not just for your own children, but for the children of this nation, you also have a responsibility. You have a responsibility to be there, to show them love, to show them kindness, because I honestly can say I would not be here if it wasn't for Wayne and if it wasn't for Libby believing in me, for stepping into the shoes and showing me the love that I was never shown. And that honestly, it's awesome now because Wayne's actually on our board too. So I remember him coming in when I was in the psych ward, and now he's coming and he's helping us propel forward into Voices of Hope, which is, it's amazing. So thank you, Wayne. What I love, I was doing some research around the definitions of shaping futures, and the definition of shaping, one that I found that I love, is a technique that is used in operant conditioning in which the behaviour is modified by stepwise reinforcement of behaviours that produce progressively closer approximations of the desired behaviour. That's a big one. Now, if we're going to be people that shape futures, not just in the financial industries, but shape the future of the next generation, and also of your own generation as well, there is, seriously, our statistics, I think it's about 60% of them now are within the kind of middle-age age bracket. So not just for the younger people, but this is relevant to your friends, this is relevant to your staff, this is relevant to your co-workers. If we're going to be people who shape futures, we can't just talk about creating change. We can't just think about it, we can't just dream it, but we've got to be people who take part in creating techniques that condition the next generation to the desired behaviours. I remember watching a TV interview not too long ago of someone saying that our generation just needs to harden up. And I actually, I was on radio and I responded saying, I don't know if you realise, but that's the stigma and that's the belief that has caused the peak of suicide rates in your own generation. That don't talk about it. We don't talk about it. No, if we're not feeling okay, then we just tighten up. We don't say anything because we're men, because we're strong. We don't do that. No. All you have to do is look around at the media, look around at what's going on. Men, you can't do that anymore. If we want to shape the next generation, we have to be willing to lead by example. We have to be willing to speak up, to speak out. You know, it's one of my favorite quotes that I now live by is that it's not about battling your past, but fighting for your future. And that's what we're doing. We're fighting for our own futures, and we're fighting for the future of the next generation, of our generation, and the younger generation. So let's not just talk about making change. Let's not just think about making change, but let's go out there and be the change that our society needs. Thank you.